What would you do if you discovered that everything you thought you knew about your own life was a carefully constructed lie? That your memories had been altered, your experiences manipulated, and your entire understanding of reality was nothing more than an elaborate cover-up designed to hide a truth so shocking it would shatter everything you believed about yourself and humanity's place in the universe? This isn't a hypothetical question for me. 6 months ago, I uncovered evidence that forced me to confront the most disturbing revelation imaginable. I had been living a double life for decades, and I hadn't even known it. But here's the thing that should make you pay attention. I have physical proof, medical documentation, photographs, evidence that even the most hardened skeptic would struggle to dismiss. My name is Victoria Larson. I'm 36 years old, and I need to tell you exactly what happened to me. But before you dismiss this as another conspiracy theory or delusional episode, understand that I'm not some fringe believer looking for attention. I'm an art restorer with 15 years of professional experience working with some of the world's most prestigious museums and private collections. My entire career depends on one crucial skill: the ability to distinguish authentic masterpieces from clever forgeries. What I'm about to reveal about Victoria's experience has never been told before. Hit that subscribe button if you want exclusive access to more untold stories that will blow your mind. Every day, I examine paintings, sculptures, and artifacts that others have authenticated, looking for the subtle inconsistencies that reveal hidden truths. I've caught forgeries that fooled renowned experts. I've uncovered restoration attempts that previous specialists tried to hide. I've spent years training my eye to spot the impossible, the out of place, the deliberately concealed. That analytical mindset, that obsession with uncovering hidden realities beneath surface appearances, is probably the only reason I'm still sane after discovering what had been hidden in my own life. My profession taught me that the most convincing lies contain elements of truth, and the most successful deceptions are the ones that feel completely natural to the person being deceived. I thought I understood the depths of human deception and the lengths people would go to hide uncomfortable truths. I had no idea that I was about to discover a deception so sophisticated, so comprehensive, that it had been operating successfully for most of my adult life. But here's where this story gets interesting, and why you should listen carefully to every word I'm about to tell you. The evidence I discovered wasn't just compelling, it was undeniable. And once I started following that evidence, it led me to a truth that I never could have imagined, even in my wildest nightmares. It started with what seemed like a minor medical issue that should have been easily resolved. For several weeks, I'd been experiencing a persistent burning sensation in my lower abdomen, accompanied by skin changes that seemed to appear and disappear without any logical explanation. The discomfort wasn't severe enough to interrupt my daily routine, but it was constant enough to be concerning. Being the methodical person my profession had trained me to be, I documented everything obsessively. I photographed the skin changes from multiple angles, kept detailed notes about when they occurred, tracked potential triggers, and researched every possible medical explanation I could find online. The symptoms followed no pattern that made sense according to conventional medical understanding. The skin would develop reddish discoloration that looked exactly like a severe sunburn despite no exposure to UV radiation. The affected areas would become hypersensitive, sometimes feeling like they were burning from the inside out. Then, just when I was preparing to seek medical attention, the symptoms would fade almost completely, only to return days or weeks later with renewed intensity. After nearly a month of this cycle, I finally made an appointment with Dr. Clark, a physician I'd been seeing for routine care for several years. I expected her to diagnose some kind of allergic reaction or stress-related skin condition and prescribe a topical treatment that would resolve the issue within days, but Dr. Clark's examination changed everything. "That's very odd," she said, her professional composure cracking slightly as she studied the area around my navel with increasing concern. "There's scar tissue here, but it's in a very unusual pattern. Almost geometric, like it was made deliberately with some kind of precise medical instrument." I told her what I'd been telling myself for weeks, that I had no memory of any surgery, any trauma, any medical procedure that could possibly explain what she was seeing. I'd never had abdominal surgery of any kind. I'd never experienced any significant injury to that area. The scar tissue was a complete mystery to me, but it did explain the persistent sensations I'd been experiencing. "Doctor," Clark continued her examination with the kind of focused intensity I recognized from my own work when I encountered something that challenged everything I thought I knew about a piece. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she documented her findings. "Victoria," she said slowly, choosing her words with obvious care. "I need to run some comprehensive tests. This scarring, combined with the skin changes you've described and photographed, is consistent with localized radiation exposure, but that would be impossible unless you'd been exposed to a significant radioactive source without knowing it." Radiation exposure. The words hit me like ice water, and I felt something shift fundamentally in my understanding of my own body and recent experiences. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling while processing the implications of Dr. Clark's preliminary diagnosis, I experienced something I'd never felt before in my entire life. It was like the most intense déjà vu imaginable, multiplied by 1,000 and accompanied by a bone-deep certainty that challenged my grip on reality. I had the absolute, unshakable conviction that I'd been in this exact position before, lying paralyzed in this bed, staring upward in terror, but not at this ceiling. Somewhere else entirely, somewhere that felt both completely foreign and disturbingly familiar. The feeling was so powerful, so unsettling that I got up and started pacing around my apartment, trying to shake off what I assumed was anxiety about the medical diagnosis. That's when I noticed something that should have been impossible to miss. Something so obvious that my failure to see it earlier felt like a deliberate blindness. There was a perfectly circular mark on my bedroom ceiling, directly above where my head rested when I slept. The mark was about the size of a quarter, and the paint there was discolored in a way that suggested something had been pressed against it with tremendous heat or pressure. I'd lived in this apartment for 3 years, sleeping in that bed almost every night. How had I never noticed this mark before? But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is where I need you to suspend your disbelief just long enough to hear the evidence that changed everything. I climbed on a chair to examine the mark more closely. It wasn't just discoloration. There was actually a slight depression in the ceiling, as if something heavy and hot had been placed there with enough force to leave a permanent impression. The edges were too precise, too geometric to be natural. This wasn't water damage or settling. This was evidence of something deliberate, something that required technology and intention. That same night, the dreams started. Except they weren't dreams at all. They were memories. Recovered memories of experiences that my conscious mind had somehow blocked or suppressed for 16 years. I found myself observing my own body lying completely paralyzed in bed while tall, impossibly thin figures moved around me with instruments that looked both impossibly advanced and somehow organically integrated, as if they were grown rather than manufactured. Their limbs were elongated, their skulls oversized, their eyes enormous and completely black. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy normal physics, and they were performing some kind of procedure on my abdomen with a needle-like device that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. I woke up convinced it had been a nightmare triggered by Dr. Clark's disturbing diagnosis and my anxiety about the ceiling mark. But then I checked my abdomen, and there was fresh irritation around the scar tissue. Irritation that definitely hadn't been there when I went to sleep. The skin was warm to the touch and slightly raised, as if something had actually been inserted and withdrawn while I was unconscious. Over the following weeks, more fragments surfaced with increasing frequency and clarity. Not dreams or imagination, recovered memories of experiences that felt more real and detailed than most of my conventional memories from the same time periods. Each recovered memory came with its own set of physical evidence that I couldn't explain away through rational analysis. The earliest clear memory I could identify dated back 16 years, when I was 20 years old. According to my journals from that time, I'd taken a solo camping trip to the mountains outside the city. Something I did regularly for inspiration in my art studies and to find the solitude necessary for deep creative work. My written records from that trip described a peaceful, restorative experience. I'd made detailed sketches of the landscape, written pages of reflective observations about art and nature, and returned home feeling refreshed and creatively energized. Nothing unusual had happened, according to my own documentation, but the recovered memory told a completely different story. I remembered being taken from my tent in the middle of the night to a room with curved walls and no visible corners, architecture that defied every principle I understood about structural engineering and design. The space felt both claustrophobic and impossibly vast, with a quality of light that had no identifiable source but illuminated everything with perfect shadowless clarity. I was conscious but completely paralyzed, lying on a table that felt like metal but was warm to the touch and seemed to conform subtly to my body shape. The beings surrounding me were unlike anything I could have imagined. Tall, thin, with pale gray skin that looked almost translucent, stretched tightly over skulls that were significantly larger than any humans. But their eyes were what I remember most clearly. Enormous, completely black, and filled with what I can only describe as compassionate intelligence. There was nothing malevolent in their gaze. If anything, they seemed almost sorry about whatever they were doing to me. The lead figure approached and began the procedure, inserting a long, needle-like instrument through my navel with precision that suggested extensive familiarity with human anatomy. As the device penetrated deeper, I felt a strange sensation. Not pain exactly, but a kind of electrical current that seemed to spread throughout my entire body. Through direct mental communication that bypassed language entirely, the being explained that this was a pregnancy test, though I somehow understood that wasn't the complete truth. The concepts and emotions appeared directly in my consciousness. They were studying me, collecting data about my reproductive system, my genetic structure, my psychological responses to extreme stress. But more than that, they were installing something. The needle-like device wasn't just extracting information, it was leaving something behind. A sophisticated monitoring system that would allow them to track my development and occasionally transmit information directly into my consciousness. The being noticed my awareness and fear and moved closer to my face. Its features became impossibly clear in that strange, sourceless light. The skin was pale gray with a slightly luminescent quality, stretched over bone structure that was both alien and somehow beautiful. But it was the eyes that held me. Enormous, dark, completely alien, yet filled with something that I could only interpret as compassion and regret. Through that same wordless communication, it made me understand several crucial things. They weren't trying to harm me. I had been selected for specific qualities they found valuable: intelligence, creativity, emotional resilience, and something they called consciousness flexibility. They were part of a long-term study of human development that had been ongoing for thousands of years. And most importantly, I wouldn't remember any of this until the time was right, until I was psychologically prepared to handle the truth about my lifelong involvement in their research. The final thing they communicated was perhaps the most disturbing. This wasn't my first contact with them. They had been monitoring me, occasionally taking me for examinations and procedures since I was a child. My entire life had been shaped by their subtle influence, and I had never known it. Then I was back in my tent, waking up with a metallic taste in my mouth that lasted for days and a persistent sense that something fundamental had changed, though I couldn't identify what. But here's the proof that makes this more than just recovered memory syndrome or psychological delusion, the physical evidence that began accumulating almost immediately after that first recovered memory. Within days of remembering the camping trip encounter, I began developing symptoms that medical texts clearly identify as acute radiation sickness. My skin developed erythema, a reddish discoloration that looked exactly like severe sunburn, despite no UV exposure. The affected areas became hypersensitive, sometimes feeling like they were burning from the inside out with an intensity that made normal activities nearly impossible. Then came what medical literature calls pied skin. Alternating patches of light and dark pigmentation that formed geometric patterns around the scar tissue. The patterns were too regular, too deliberate to be natural. They looked like technical diagrams, as if information was being encoded directly into my skin. Hair began falling out in small, precise sections. Not the random hair loss associated with stress or illness, but geometric patterns that corresponded exactly to the skin discoloration. I started experiencing waves of nausea that would hit without warning. Crushing fatigue that would leave me bedridden for hours, and that persistent metallic taste that I now recognized from 16 years earlier. Dr. Clark ran extensive blood work, imaging studies, and consulted with specialists in radiation medicine. The exposure was undeniable. My cellular structure showed clear signs of radiation damage, but she couldn't identify any possible terrestrial source. The isotope signatures were unlike anything in her experience or in the medical literature she consulted. "Victoria," she said during one of our follow-up appointments, "I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The radiation exposure is extensive and ongoing, but there's no identifiable source. It's as if the radioactive material is somehow internal, integrated into your tissue in a way that shouldn't be possible." As more memories surfaced over the following months, I began to understand the true scope of what had been happening to me throughout my entire life. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic, long-term study that had been conducted with scientific precision and careful attention to my psychological development. The beings, who I came to understand existed in what they called parallel dimensional space, had been monitoring me continuously and taking me for detailed examinations on a regular schedule that corresponded to significant developmental milestones in my life. The procedures varied depending on what they were studying at each stage. During childhood encounters that I was now beginning to remember, they had focused primarily on cognitive development, creativity, and emotional resilience. They would present me with complex puzzles, artistic challenges, and scenarios designed to test my problem-solving abilities and emotional responses under stress. As I entered adolescence, their focus shifted to physical development, reproductive system maturation, and the evolution of my consciousness as I became capable of more sophisticated, abstract thinking. The procedures became more invasive but also more informative, as they studied how my enhanced capabilities were developing. In my early 20s, around the time of the camping trip encounter, they began what they called consciousness expansion protocols. The implant they had placed during that procedure wasn't just for monitoring. It was a sophisticated device designed to gradually increase my perceptual abilities and access to information that existed beyond normal human awareness. This explained phenomena I'd been experiencing throughout my career that I'd never been able to understand. My unusual ability to detect forgeries that fooled other experts, even when the technical analysis supported their authenticity. My tendency to have breakthrough insights about restoration techniques that seemed to come from nowhere but proved to be remarkably effective. My persistent feeling that there was more to art, to beauty, to reality itself than conventional understanding allowed. They had been subtly enhancing my natural capabilities, not changing who I was fundamentally, but helping me access more of my potential. I was part of a long-term experiment in accelerated human development, serving simultaneously as subject and beneficiary of their research, but recovering these memories and understanding my lifelong involvement with non-human intelligence came with a devastating personal cost. Complete isolation from normal human relationships. How do you tell friends, family, colleagues that you've been part of an extraterrestrial research project for most of your life? How do you maintain normal social connections when you're carrying around knowledge that humanity is being studied, evaluated, and gradually prepared for contact with civilizations beyond our current comprehension? I tried sharing my experiences with a few people I trusted most. My best friend since college listened patiently to my initial account, then gently suggested I might be experiencing a stress-related breakdown and should consider seeing a psychiatrist. My sister became genuinely concerned about my mental health and started calling daily to check on my psychological state. A colleague who had always respected my professional judgment began treating me with the kind of careful politeness reserved for people who might be dangerously unstable. The reactions were predictably dismissive, but what hurt most was the way these people I cared about started looking at me. Not with anger or disgust, but with pity and concern, as if I'd been diagnosed with a degenerative mental illness. They didn't disbelieve me because they thought I was lying. They disbelieved me because they genuinely thought I was sick. It became clear that this knowledge would have to be carried largely alone, at least until more people were ready to hear and accept these truths. The isolation was crushing, made worse by the fact that the experiences were continuing with increasing frequency and intensity. Once I had started remembering, the being seemed to realize that maintaining the illusion of normalcy was no longer necessary or productive. The contacts became more frequent, more direct, and less concerned with hiding evidence of their occurrence. They began appearing to me during waking hours, communicating more openly about their research objectives and timeline. During these conscious encounters, they explained that my case was part of a much larger project involving thousands of selected humans worldwide. Each of us represented different aspects of human potential: scientific, artistic, spiritual, leadership, communication abilities. We were being prepared to serve as bridges between humanity and non-human intelligence when open contact became inevitable. My role as an art restorer was becoming clearer and more significant. Art, they explained, was one of humanity's most powerful tools for processing and integrating new realities that challenged existing worldviews. Through my work, I was helping preserve and restore humanity's cultural memory, while also subtly preparing people for expanded consciousness. They began teaching me restoration techniques that weren't documented in any educational institution or professional literature. Methods for revealing hidden layers of meaning in artwork that went beyond historical and technical analysis. Techniques for detecting spiritual and emotional resonances embedded in creative works by artists who had been unconsciously channeling expanded states of awareness. My professional work began incorporating these insights, and I noticed that people responded differently to pieces I'd restored using these enhanced techniques. Viewers seemed more contemplative, more open to considering larger possibilities about the nature of reality and human potential. The artwork seemed to trigger something in people's consciousness that made them more receptive to paradigm-shifting ideas. The physical evidence continued accumulating in ways that made denial impossible. Beyond the ongoing radiation symptoms and the ceiling mark, I began finding other anomalies when I started looking systematically at my living environment and personal belongings. Small scars in unusual locations that I couldn't account for, each with its own associated memories of specific procedures and examinations. Objects in my apartment that had been moved or rearranged in precise patterns that I hadn't created. Time discrepancies, hours that I couldn't account for, during which my normal routine had somehow continued without my conscious participation. Most convincing were the technical insights that were flowing into my professional work at an accelerating pace. I began understanding artistic techniques, historical contexts, and cultural connections that weren't documented anywhere in academic literature. Knowledge that I couldn't have acquired through any conventional education or research, but that proved accurate when I investigated it further. I was accessing information that could only have come from a source with comprehensive knowledge of human history and cultural development spanning thousands of years. The beings were sharing not just their observations of human artistic evolution, but their understanding of how creativity and consciousness were interconnected across all intelligent species they had studied. As my conscious relationship with them deepened, I began understanding the broader context of what was happening, not just to me, but to our entire species. Humanity was at a crucial evolutionary juncture where our technological capabilities were advancing exponentially, but our wisdom and collective consciousness weren't developing at the same pace. This gap between capability and understanding had destroyed other promising species they had encountered throughout the universe. Their long-term study and careful intervention with selected humans was their attempt to help us avoid that fate by accelerating our consciousness development to match our technological progress. The hardest part of this ongoing relationship became the waiting and the responsibility, knowing that open contact between humanity and non-human intelligence was approaching, but not knowing exactly when or how it would unfold. Living with the knowledge that everything was about to change for our species while still maintaining normal social relationships and dealing with mundane human concerns that felt increasingly trivial. Sometimes I felt like I was living in two completely different realities simultaneously, the ordinary world of human concerns and social expectations and the extraordinary world of cosmic preparation for humanity's integration into a larger galactic community. Each world was absolutely real and demanded my attention, but they operated according to completely different rules and priorities. The beings assured me that this tension was temporary, that eventually the two realities would merge as open contact became inevitable and humanity began awakening to our larger cosmic context. But until that time arrived, I had to maintain the balance between both worlds while serving as a bridge to help others make the transition when they were ready. Looking back now, I can see how every aspect of my life had been preparation for this role. My career taught me to recognize authenticity and detect deception, skills that proved essential when evaluating my own extraordinary experiences. My analytical nature helped me process complex, paradigm-shifting information without losing my psychological stability. My natural skepticism ensured that I questioned and tested everything rather than accepting it uncritically. Even my initial resistance to believing in the reality of these experiences was part of the preparation. By working through my own doubts, fears, and rational objections, I developed the understanding and patience needed to help others who would go through the same process of awakening and acceptance. The journey from skeptical realist to conscious participant in ongoing extraterrestrial contact has transformed me in ways I'm still discovering. I see the world differently now, understanding that what we perceive as reality is just a small fraction of what actually exists in the universe around us. Most importantly, I've developed a sense of purpose that transcends personal success or conventional achievement. I'm part of a cosmic story that's still being written, a story that will determine whether humanity successfully takes its place among the advanced civilizations of the universe or follows the path of species that destroyed themselves through rapid technological development without corresponding wisdom. The recovered memories that started this journey 6 months ago have become just the foundation of an ongoing relationship with non-human intelligence that grows deeper and more complex with each encounter. I am no longer just remembering the past. I am actively participating in humanity's preparation for a future that will redefine everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. And that future is arriving faster than anyone realizes.